Welcome to the Perinatal Wellbeing Podcast. I'm Christine, your host and certified perinatal mental health professional. This podcast is all about authentic conversations. We want to open up the discussions around perinatal health and well-being, from mood and anxiety disorders to breastfeeding to grief and loss in the perinatal period, and everything in between. While this is not therapy or medical advice, it is the place where we are going to continue to open up the discussion around all things perinatal mental, physical, emotional, and sexual health to help reduce stigma and break down these barriers to support. I acknowledge that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which Perinatal Wellbeing Ontario is located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. I am proud to acknowledge that there are 46 treaties and other agreements that cover the territory now called Ontario. I acknowledge that I am a settler on these lands, and it is on these ancestral and treaty lands that I live, learn, and work. Hello, and welcome to Perinatal Wellbeing episode number 6. Today is part 2 of my conversation with Dr. Jodi Paluski. Jodi is a researcher, neuroscientist, therapist, podcaster, and parent. Jodi is from Canada and currently lives in France with her partner and 2 kids. Jodi researches the parental brain, and you can learn all about it on her website and on her podcast, Mommy Brain Revisited. Jodi is also a perinatal mental health therapist. In this episode, Jodi shares her story of her delivery with her second child and her experiences with nursing him in a different country than the first delivery. We also talk about the neuroscience of anxiety and the biology of nursing. And because we had so much to talk about, you get to hear Jodi's story in 2 parts. Please see the last week's show for part 1. You can find Jodi at www.jodipaluski.com, JODIPAWLUSKI.com, and her podcast, Mommy Brain Revisited, is on most major platforms. In this episode, we do talk about intrusive thoughts, anxiety, and challenges with nursing. So you're in a small town.
Yeah.
So you tell us, what was that experience like for you?
I think the change of the culture was kind of nice for me because I could speak English again, and it was kind of neighborhoody. And so I was walking with Zoe. I still was, I had a student in the Netherlands still. So at that, actually, when we landed in Ohio, like a couple days later, I'm like, I'm getting an iPhone. And it was like the first time I got an iPhone. I mean, this was 2011. Yeah.
Okay.
2012. It was 2012. So so then I could like walk with Zoe, check my emails, do some stuff. So we had this whole nice routine. Everything was quite nice. So that was really good. We were quite content and happy. Then it was around October. So she's about 8 months. We're like, I think we're ready to just try for another one. Like, why not?
Wow.
So great. Like, blah, blah, blah. So then, and I'm still was breastfeeding, whatever, but she was a good, she was a good baby. We were happy, let's say.
Yeah.
So then we tried for another one with the anticipation that it will take months, of course, because you never know. This can take some time. Then I ended up being pregnant right away. But not knowing it, or the pregnancy test, I had my days mixed up. And so I took a test. I felt so bad. And I took a test and it said I'm not pregnant. And I was like, I was literally like on the floor, like I have to go to the doctor. I'm probably dying because I was so exhausted and depleted. Like I was just like, this is so rough. Then I took another test and I found out I was pregnant.
Oh, wow. And were you sick with Zoe with your first?
Just like minor nausea and like food aversions. Like I didn't want to eat meat. Olives were gross, like some stuff like that. And then I was pregnant with my second, and he, once we got that sorted out, then I was on, I think, some vitamin supplements like Floradix or something. And then I was doing a bit better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but now I'm in Ohio, so I need to search again for my healthcare people. We're in a
Right.
very small town. So what do we do? There's one big clinic in town. There's like gynecologist clinic, and then there's 2 midwives that actually can birth in the hospital in town. Then there's a whole bunch of midwives that do home births. And so then it became like, what do I want? And I ended up going because I wanted, like before, I wanted midwives who could also work in the hospital and who tied with a gynecologist. That was very important to me. And
Yes.
so I ended up then going with the midwives that they birthed in, like you could birth with them in hospital only, not at home.
Right.
So I went with that team, and it was 2 midwives and a gynecologist.
Hmm.
So you'd get one of them. So I did do
Right.
shopping around because I did visit the other clinic, which it wasn't the place for me. So again, I did my shopping
Yes.
around, but this time in
Yeah.
English.
Yes. Yeah. Which I'm sure felt better, like just knowing you could communicate just that much better and clearer. And
Yeah, so that was a big difference.
Yeah, I'm
And so that
sure.
was nice. But then we were shocked with the cost of healthcare in America. And so that was something we weren't aware of. So Belgium, yeah, Belgium is socialist. And
Yeah.
so, for example, like to get a blood test during pregnancy done, it was like, I think we paid €8, which is probably
Okay.
$10, $11.
Yeah.
And then when we were in the States, we got the bill. We had 90% medical coverage through work. My husband was a professor at a university there. So we had this, and I was still doing research at the time, but we were paying like $300 for blood tests. And so
Wow.
then, yeah, so then thought, this is crazy. Plus we do use this similar type of testing in the lab. So we like, somebody's making some big money here. I don't know what's going
Yes.
on.
Yes.
So then I ended up talking to the midwife about different tests to do or not to do, like the glucose tolerance test, because I don't want to have to pay for it. I didn't like, it isn't necessarily what does she think, because previously I wasn't, I didn't have gestational diabetes. So I did a bit more discussion on what we're going to do or not do in terms of testing based on my previous birth.
Right.
Um,
And that sounds like it would have been so helpful, like that you were able to do that and not just thinking, oh, I have to do this because they say I have to do it.
yeah.
Right. And then also how the cost is of course, it's such a big influence. So I can imagine people in the States that, of course, I'm just guessing, I don't live in the States, but that don't get probably barely any prenatal
Yeah.
care because it's so expensive.
Yeah. I mean, in certain states, prenatal care is free. I do
Okay.
know this, but then you end
Okay.
up with people who have multiple challenges, health
Of course.
challenges, because they haven't
Yeah.
been before, right? Very
Right.
often.
Right.
Um, yeah, I mean,
Wow.
yeah, it was quite a different world for us in that regard. And so we just, and I mean, we also come from a place of privilege. And so we felt that we could have these discussions, and I was prepared to have the
Absolutely.
discussions. I could understand them. I knew the research behind it. I knew it was okay to say, I'm going to take some time and think about that. And if they didn't like that, then I was also going to find somebody else.
Yeah,
Maybe it's my
absolutely.
personality, but
No, but I
it's like,
also
it's really
I think
important.
that's great. Yeah, it is important. And I just wish that more people knew that they could do that,
Yes. Yeah, you can
right?
do that to some
Yeah.
degree. You can shop around a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or you can also have a conversation with the person to be like, can you
Yes.
please clarify? Here's my list of questions I wrote down to come in with, and I would like your time to go through them. Like,
Yeah.
you need to feel heard by your
Absolutely.
healthcare provider.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I had a good team there. One thing that did happen while I was there is that we were in a kind of an anti-vax zone. And so there was whooping cough going around, and in
Oh,
adults,
wow.
yeah, and in adults, whooping cough is very much like a cold, but if an infant gets it, regardless of breastfeeding or not or anything, they can die.
Yes. Yeah.
So this came up in my 3rd trimester. My midwife informed me that I should probably get vaccinated. I was vaccinated, of course, when I was younger against this, like we usually are if we're doing the typical vaccinations, but that can wear off. And so she
Yes.
recommended I get another one. And at that point, I said, I wanted to think about it because I wanted to just go back to the literature a bit, because, when you influence or affect your immune system during pregnancy, I wanted to make sure that this was a good decision. So we took a day or two on that front. And I ended up getting vaccinated for sure, because that was the safer option at this point.
Right.
But it did take
Okay.
time to think about it and discuss it.
Yeah,
And I think that
absolutely.
that's fair.
Of course it is. Not just feeling pressure to say yes in that moment to whatever medical procedure they're suggesting,
Yeah.
right? Even if
Yeah.
you do go with it and get it done, great. But if you're able to take that time to think about it and say, okay, does this align with our values? Like, does this feel okay to us?
Yeah.
I think that is so important and can feel empowering.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So then, and I should also mention, I did stop the beginning of my second trimester, I stopped breastfeeding my first.
Yeah.
And I also was traveling a bit from work at that time. It was really hard for me to do that, but she wasn't interested. Like so it was easy, in fact, for her. Like she
For
could,
her.
I'm like, come on and eat. And she's like, yeah, whatever, I'm done with you. And I'm like, oh, what do you do? What do you
Oh,
mean? But she really
yes.
had been phasing it out naturally herself. So,
Right.
yeah, plus for me, I felt it like it was taking a bit more of a toll on me,
Yeah. Being
physically.
pregnant and
Yeah.
working and traveling and nursing, and that's a lot.
Yeah, it was, but anyway, so that was, it's fortunately that went rather smoothly. So she never asked for it again. She couldn't care less. It was a bit disappointing after all the pain and
Yes.
agony and getting it
At the
going.
beginning.
And then she's all like, we're
Yes.
done. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Thanks for your time.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's hard on you.
Yeah, but it was fine.
Yes.
I think through all of this, I should say I'm fortunate to have people around me, even through, like, at the time I was just on Facebook with friends and family, but we did a lot of like chatting about things or just laughing about things, especially
Good.
in our house. We still laugh about a lot of things. Like, yeah.
Humor can be very healing for
Yeah.
sure. And did you feel like any of these things, especially the trouble with breastfeeding, your daughter being in the intensive care unit, do you feel like you kind of carried some wounds with you from that? Like, did you have any therapy around kind of dealing with all that stuff that you went through?
Yeah, that's a good question. I didn't, in fact, have therapy around that. I feel like a lot of it was a blur, and we were changing like countries and things like this. We talked about it a lot.
Yeah.
I also think I used it as like an awareness for the second time around, what could happen. We also, looking back, like we highlighted some funny things. Like I would be like, look at this sausages, like, the meal thing I told you, like some things were just
Yes.
so like bizarre. And so you had to
Yeah.
like, we
Yeah.
highlighted these happy moments, or we made light of things. So I think,
Yeah.
and I also grew up with a very positive parent, and my mom is very positive. And so then
Right.
I think that helped to turn things into reframe the experience.
Absolutely.
And so that was also
Absolutely.
important.
Good. Yeah, which
Yeah.
can be so helpful in even just processing the story and being
Yes.
able to pull out those funny moments or those positive moments, or, even like feeling so connected, with your partner, and, laughing at the sausages and,
Yeah.
you
And
know,
the coffee,
uh,
like, who is she offering me coffee? Like, who does
yes.
that?
Yeah, I'm gonna be up all night. Baby's gonna be up all night.
Looking back, it was also helpful to have those people around me, and also
Yes.
to have people I could talk to about my struggles, who were, and also who prioritized my sleep. So it was very
Yes.
much like, go to bed. Like my mom was like, give her a bottle and go to bed. And I was like, whoa, but I can't, like, I should pump. She's like, go to bed now. And so, and it was kind of helpful just to have that there too. Yeah. And not to be feeling some pressure to do things a certain way, but just to actually survive, and
Absolutely.
that's it.
Yeah, just being able to kind of take care of everyone's well-being. Yes,
Yeah.
of course, we want to take care of baby because, they're new and they're 100% dependent. And it's important to be able to take care of ourselves or have people around us that can help take care of us too.
Yeah.
So that we can also be the best parent we can be and be the best, version of ourselves as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think carrying that forward, that experience to the second one, I was really, again, shopped around for my people, as I said, but then also knew how things could go and that we did it. And so we'll just see how it goes the second time. And then it went differently.
Okay. And was it differently good or differently not so good?
Good, and it was just different. I would say just differently and good in different ways. Again, baby didn't want to come out. So again, I had the scheduled induction, which this time I went on the date. I didn't have any water breaking. When I didn't have contractions really beforehand. Once I went into the doctor, or I had my appointment, and I tried all my food things as well, just so you know.
Yes.
Plus hot wings, the hottest wings in town. I tried it all. I walked like 4 miles. I tried it all. Anyway, so we get into the hospital. My mom had flown to take care of my daughter, which was like the first time we left her with someone besides us alone, which was a big thing. And then we ended up, when in the hospital, I was like, please start me on the lowest drip again. Like, here we go, Pitocin. My friend. And I was already 4 centimeters just dilated before I started. So that was a win.
That's great.
Yeah. And then we started the drip, and then the contractions came full on in the front, super intense, like really intense. And then my midwife told me that I tested positive for opioids.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Right.
And that the social workers were going to come.
Oh
and
my gosh.
That, and I was just like, hold on a second, wait till my contraction's over so I can process. Yeah. And then they're going to probably check out baby, check you out. She sent the sample for more testing that's more specific to like illegal substances.
Because you knew you weren't taking opioids.
Yeah. So just to clarify, I wasn't taking any kind of legal or illegal opioids, drugs of any kind. But we figured it out later. I did have a poppy seed roll from a bakery in town. And so that did it. But it was terrifying to think now in a country where we're both not citizens, that the social worker will come in, and in America. So that was really scary. Like, I can only imagine. Then you couldn't deal with it because you have the contractions coming quite intense.
Right.
Yeah.
It takes priority.
Yeah. So then he was out in 3 hours. But in the end, I was like, I don't think I can do it. And my midwife's like, well, no one else is going to. I was like, well, those are words of encouragement.
Thanks.
I had one trick the nurse told me during that time, because if you birth without epidural, often you vocalize quite loudly. I don't know, but this happens. So you're like the loudest person on the ward. And I had a nurse who was like, just blow it out instead of like moan it out. So that was really helpful. This whole like blowing was very, very helpful. So yeah. So he came out. So that was great. We didn't know what we were having either time, which was also fun.
Right. That's fun.
And
how was he health-wise when he came out?
He was good. He was smaller than my daughter. Everything was fine with him, but he had to also get antibiotics or something because I tested with strep B the first time. There was this whole procedure, what they do, blah, 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 but everything was fine. He was with us in the room. That part was okay, except for then we had the drug issue to contend with. So the gynecologist, when I told her about the poppy seeds, she's like, oh, that would do it. And so she put it in my chart, but she didn't put it in my son's chart. So then the pediatrician came in. He's like, I'm not going to judge you, but it says here that you're positive for drugs. And so we're just going to have to do some observation for 2 days. You have to stay 1 day longer and all these things. So in the end, everything was fine. But I'm going to say that was like, that's scary. It's scary.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you
Yeah.
think, and then imagine too of how that affects people from reporting any substance use at all,
Yeah.
to get
Yeah.
help, or even reporting things of when they're struggling with their mental health after
Oh
baby's
yeah.
born or
Oh
things like
yeah.
that, because we're so scared. We don't know, like, are you going to take my baby away because I have these weird intrusive thoughts, or
Yeah. I
it
know.
trickles down, right?
It's huge. And if people aren't
Absolutely.
aware, like the poppy seed bagel thing, I Googled it and it exists, but
Yes.
in fact, it didn't seem to convince the pediatrician. And I was like, no, but really, it was a poppy seed roll, like really. And he's all like,
Yes.
mm-hmm. And I'm like,
Right.
no, come on.
Did they test baby?
I don't remember what they did. In fact, they
Okay.
think they observed him for withdrawal symptoms.
Right.
And I did took another test from me, like a
Okay.
urine sample, I'm pretty sure, a blood test. It must have been a
Right.
urine sample. And because yeah, I actually don't remember how that ended, except for we did go home after 2 days and
Right.
everything, we got the all clear.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. And how, if I can ask, how much did that all cost? The
Oh yeah, that,
delivery?
so that was like, and we had coverage, like a lot of coverage.
Yes,
And I didn't
90%.
have 90%. We didn't have an anesthesiologist. We had the midwife present, but also the gynecologist,
Yes.
just because the midwife had to work under supervision. She was still training and the other midwife was on vacation. So we got like whatever. So we weren't charged for that. From what I know, we paid $2,000 for 2 nights in hospital. And that was just for baby. And Zoe was a week, my daughter was a week in hospital in Belgium, and we paid like 200 and something euros. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, you pay
Wow.
differences in taxes, let's face
Yes.
it,
Yes.
but this is
But
expensive
still,
healthcare. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's without a NICU stay, for example. If you
No,
had, or if you had a surgical birth,
no, yeah. Or
I can
any
only
other
imagine.
intervention on top of
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
I was just thinking before I continue,
Yeah.
is that there's one thing I should say, is that
Yeah.
in my end of grad school, I did have intrusive thoughts quite extensively. And so I had to manage those with the help of going to psychologists and doing other things. And I knew that that could come back with parenthood. And so I also, by the time I was pregnant, I felt I had a very good management over things, and what I could do to maintain that. But I mean, I'm not saying we didn't have all sorts of crazy thoughts coming through with each of the babies, which happens, and my husband too. And just like, this is important to realize that it's very normal to think all sorts of things when your baby comes. I think
Thank
that
you for saying
that's,
that.
yeah,
And
something important.
sorry, I was going to say, I always relate it to like what I say and what I talked about in the podcast episode about intrusive thoughts, is that the anxiety is alerting us to
Yes.
danger in our environment, right? And saying like, okay, this could be dangerous for baby, right? And so I kind of like look at it and I try to explain it to people on that, nervous system basis, that we're like wired to protect our babies and to be vigilant about the environment, because at this stage, when they're newborns, we're
Yeah.
doing everything, right? And so that it is quite normal to say like, or to think, to have these intrusive thoughts like, oh, I could drop the
Yeah.
baby down the stairs, because the anxiety is telling us,
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
careful, like high alert. I'm just wondering from like that neuroscience perspective, is that how you would see it as well? Or
Yeah,
like,
I mean, I think that anxiety is a healthy and normal thing to have, right? And those intrusive thoughts, those like sorting out the environment,
yes,
like you said, like you want to make sure baby survives. So you're going to think of all the scenarios that could be dangerous, for example. So this is like normal, but when it starts to become obsessive or become consuming, this is not healthy. And so that's, I mean, I like to think of it more so now as like the prefrontal cortex, which is that area of your brain that makes decisions, is not quite working well against the amygdala, which is telling you like, oh my gosh, like all this stuff's going on. I mean, in a simplified version, because of course there's other areas of the brain involved, but yeah, so there is, but there, anxiety, these emotions, like emotions are emotions, you're allowed to have a range of them. I can definitely tell you as a parent that I would happily rent my children out periodically or give them away free. There,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Or pay someone.
Yeah, anything. But we joke about this, but I think I do this, and I start to realize, at least with the thoughts and anxiety, sometimes I like to think about, what is it telling you? Like, what do you need to do? And so it's telling you, maybe you need more sleep, maybe you need less screen time. Like, what are some things that help you feel calm, and try to tap into those a bit more, and also know that they're normal. So
Yeah.
they're normal to have, but they're not normal to consume you. So that's when it's not healthy.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
to seek support.
Yeah, definitely seek support and talk to people
and
about it, because I had a friend before I had kids. I remember her telling me she had just one at the time, and she was like, "Oh, you'll probably think of 1,000 ways your kid will like die every day." And I was like, "What?"
Yeah, like that sounds
But that actually
terrible.
stuck with me, because then she's like, "And it's normal. It's just normal." And then you're like,
Yeah.
okay. So,
Yeah.
but I think that's a good way to think about it, as these things are normal, and just let them go as much as you can.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
if you can't, I mean, talk about
Yeah.
it, talk to someone, talk to a professional. And
Yes.
it's treatable. There's so many different ways to help, to modify how you're feeling. So that's really important. Yeah.
Absolutely. How did feeding go, and like coming home
So
with
I
your son?
remember, feeding I was quite anxious, I would say, about it going well, of course, from the last time. So I had brought in my pump, because I had purchased a pump for my first, because I needed to pump to increase supply. So I brought the pump to the hospital with me. I remember this now, just to, like, in case we needed to get things going and get my flat nipples out. Not that I need everybody to know that, but apparently you have different shapes, and they tell you when they look at them.
Yes.
Of course. Yeah. So, but then, so I had that. I was prepared for that. We did the skin to skin. He wasn't latching. I was starting to get a bit ramped up about it. My midwife's like, "Look, 24 hours, then we will be concerned." And I was like, "Oh, nobody told me that. If I would have known beforehand," nobody knew beforehand, because the nurses were like putting food down her mouth. And I remember also, like, at some point understanding they just need a little tiny bit of the first little bit. Like, they don't need to guzzle 20 mils or anything, just a
literally
drop.
like,
Oof. Yeah. So this I didn't know.
That's the thing, right? And even the fact that with your first, the midwife was literally crying because your daughter wasn't latching. So of course that's going to tell you the message that, oh my gosh, something's wrong. Like, this is not going well, right? And then to have someone tell you, no, it's like, slow down. It's okay.
I felt like I had my people prepared for my birth, but I actually didn't prepare for the after part, because I was like, oh, biologically this should kind of work out, and then if it doesn't, I'll be fine. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I really wanted that to work out, or I feel weird about it not working. And we didn't know about latching, head posture, colostrum. I mean, I think my brother, who had 2 kids at the time, he was like, they just need the colostrum just a little bit and you're fine. I mean, having your older brother tell you that, you're like, what? Right. So that kind of sticks with you too. Like, cause I was lucky to have these positive forces around me being like, calm it, it's fine. So baby number 2, I was like, well, I'm bringing my pump, because last time they didn't know what was going on. I'm trying to help them figure out how to change the shape, so latching helps. But then, I had this midwife who's like, 24 hours. And I was like, okay. Like, do we have Wi-Fi in the room? Because I'm going to go on PubMed and look at the research. That did help calm me down. And I don't think I Googled anything, in fact. Good for me.
Good.
Because I had faith in
Yay.
her. And she was also, again, another force who was just like this person who was, I feel like, made to midwife. She had like placenta earrings and stuff. But, you know, like this person who was very much like, boom, this is how it goes.
Yeah.
You got this. We're fine.
Yeah.
And I ate a lot of sushi. I will also tell you that. So he did start latching. The breastfeeding seemed to go okay. But in fact, so we get home. I don't know how, like, you know how it's all a bit of blur. I remember actually checking my email in the hospital because I was like, yeah, whatever. I had a baby. I'm fine. So what do I need to do work-wise? Like, how are my students doing? What's going on with that paper? So I'm like on email day 2, no problem. I just felt like good to go. It was fine. So I was back at it kind of. The research is like this. It's a little bit fluid. It's hard to stop and you continue and it's kind of part of your life, right? Like it's really, and you can also do it solo in your pajamas at home. You can write papers, respond to emails. Like it's a bit different than a structured workplace. Absolutely. So I was back doing that a bit, having a baby. My mom was around. My daughter, I will tell you, when she met my son the first morning, like when we gave birth, that I guess that late morning, he cried and she started to cry and cry. And she was 20 months. She's like, and baby's crying. So she's crying. So there were a lot of conversations about that's how he's talking and expressing how he's feeling. And it's okay if he's crying, we're gonna like help him so he feels better. But she really cried. Like she just, just crying. But then it was lots of fun having the two of them together after initially. But going back to the breastfeeding, so then I'm all like, okay, are they going to produce enough? I have my pump ready, we've got formula ready, we're ready, like we've got this, we did it before, we will survive, let's see what happens. And then he really like latched a lot and he would scream a lot when he was trying to latch and drink, and it was like it was tiring. So sometimes I would pump, give the bottle, and my husband would feed. I remember sometimes I would like feed, sit down to eat, and he would want to eat again. And my husband was like, no, you're eating. Like I will take him and walk for like 20 minutes, like do whatever, but you have to eat. And he can't rule our lives right now. That kind of idea, right? Which was important. So we went through this, and I don't know, at some point early in the first 2 weeks, I would say, I remembered that I had met a woman at a conference for pediatrics, the European Pediatrics Association conference, before I had kids. And we were chatting. She was also doing research. She was a nurse, a mom of 5. And we were talking, I don't know what we were talking about, how we got on the topic of breastfeeding. And she had said she fed all of hers on one side because I have a preference. And so that stuck with me because I know there's nipple preference in animals, like in kittens, for example, they often will come out, latch onto one, and that will be theirs for a lot of the time. This is the idea anyway. So I was like, it somehow came to mind, this one conversation with one person. A few years later, when I'm struggling with him and he's feeding better on one side, but not on the other. And then I was like, I'm feeding him on one side. That's it. And so, and so then it was like, okay, so the other side, I'll just pump and store it. Or what we did is poured it into a bottle and fed him, like topped him up if needed, and gradually reduce the pumping on that side. But I was also producing so much milk for him, which was totally reversed. And that's why he was sputtering and choking, like he couldn't latch and drink it all and swallow it. And so, which was like, not what I had anticipated. So I fed him on one side until almost 2 years.
And physically for you, like comfort level,
it was fine.
How was that
It was actually no problem at all. I also produced enough to do exclusively the one side. We didn't, after the first little bit, we didn't use anything from the freezer or from the second side. I let the second side like stop, like it actually stopped producing. I don't know if it always would do this, but it did in my
Isn't
case. So then
isn't it
it's
amazing
pretty
how the
wild.
human
I
body
thought this
works?
was really wild.
Yes.
So then I had, of course, near a feed, one side was much bigger than the other, especially as he was getting bigger because he's drinking more. So that was entertaining,
Yeah.
let's say.
Again, taking
Yeah.
what you can, making, laughing
Yeah.
about it.
And
And
I wasn't
yes,
like,
yes.
now I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
this would have been such a good post for like Instagram or something, but I wasn't on any of that beforehand. I don't have any pictures
Yes.
even.
Yes.
Not that you want to see that, but for my own, like, remember how big it was? Like one was like a
Yeah.
watermelon and one is like a peach. That's how it felt.
Yes.
So I fed him on one
Yes.
side. Yeah, it worked like a darn. I mean, he didn't always feed every 3 hours. Like my daughter was a bit more of that kind of a scheduler. He was get hungry and do the cluster
Right.
feeding and what have you. But we sorted it. We sometimes did the bottle, like milk in the bottle, and I pump, but actually not as things went okay, a bit more smoothly with him after we sorted out the one side situation. Yeah. But he was an early waker. So
What
my
do you
husband did 2 hours of walking around the kitchen
Okay.
island like every day for months, so I could sleep a bit
Oh,
more. Yeah.
oh, that's lovely. What do you think contributed to kind of that settling into the breastfeeding that worked for you and your son, the second time around? What
Again,
contributed
I
to
think it
that?
came back to just having this idea that my body could probably do this and sort it out. And this one person had an experience that was successful with 5 kids. Biologically, it makes sense if you go with the theory that it produces what the baby needs. So then why, I mean, okay, let's give it a try. Also, I'm a little bit of a trial and error type person. So I was willing to risk it because I had a backup. We could go back to trying to do each side or pumping the other. We could problem solve. I also,
Or
the option, like there was
options, yeah.
no discussion with my partner about any of it. I don't remember ever, maybe I blocked it out if we did discuss it, blocked out his opinion, like we're done. This
Right.
is what I'm doing.
Right.
I don't think there
Yes.
was I didn't have any backlash from anyone. I was all okay, go for it. Not that I had a huge circle of people I was talking to about it, but I don't think, I mean, I was bottle fed baby and I turned out fine.
See, like, do you think that was you even, with your daughter, your first delivery? Yes, we can learn stuff from other people and hear stories and kind of be prepared in that sense. But when we're in it, it's very different when we're actually experiencing it. But what I'm hearing is you were also trusting
Yeah.
yourself to advocate for yourself, to the healthcare providers or finding healthcare providers that you could feel comfortable with.
Yeah.
And then trusting yourself, like, okay, if this doesn't work, I can problem solve. I can go on to the
Yeah.
next thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah. I think it was a bit of trusting myself more than a confidence thing. It was more of a trust. Like I can figure this out biologically. Some
Yes.
things should be clicking. Maybe they're not
Yeah.
going to click perfectly for me, but I'm going to go with trying to sort this out. Yeah. And I think that helped a lot. And also just really doing it as a partnership with my partner and having
Yes.
the extra support to, get those extra 2 hours in the morning to sleep, right? Like you can't make decisions if you're super tired. To have someone like literally, I would feed, he would get up and change the baby and we would go back to bed. So
Yeah.
like having some of those basics kind of supported so I could more easily try new things or experiment a little bit or have maybe it was easier to make some decisions to problem solve because I had a little bit more sleep. Someone was making sure I was eating and taking the baby so I could do that, who also cooked as well. Stuff like this, right? So we could, yeah, so that helps. I think that really helps to have someone to share the load. Single parenting is like, I mean, is a really, really, really
Huge.
challenging thing to do. And so if you
Absolutely.
can have a support person there who's can pick up on some of this stuff so you can get some basics, sleep,
Absolutely.
food, it can make a big
Yeah.
difference.
And I think it's so important to, like you said, thinking about, okay, planning the birth and finding my people,
Yeah.
and then also making sure we put that in place for after birth as
Yeah.
well, right?
Yeah.
Having that postpartum plan, that post-birth plan, right? Of, okay, how am I going to get meals, or, how am I going to get sleep and water and all of those things, and some kind of break,
Yeah.
and just even someone to talk to, or who can I go to for breastfeeding or lactation advice or consulting, like maybe looking up some of those things to just at least know what's in your area
Yeah.
or what you can access. So
Yeah.
if you do need to reach out, you at least have like a number or a name kind of easily accessible, because you don't want to wait too long, especially with nursing, if something's not going right.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I already, because I was aware that like mental health could be an issue, I knew I could always call, let's say, my psychologist I saw ages ago, and she would always try to help me. Like I had, but I think when it came to lactation, I was, at least the first time, totally oblivious. I didn't think about it.
Totally.
And then the second
Yeah.
time was a different experience, but we had done so much the first time and learned a lot that the second time we went into it with more skill and more awareness. So that was really
Yeah,
helpful.
absolutely.
Yeah, but I mean, for us, my grandma always told us that marriage is a partnership, like it's a partnership. And my grandparents, there was no like, she does that, he does that, and those are strict rules in, traditional couple kind of thing. Yeah. So that's went far away for me personally. And that's what we do in parenting. It is a partnership. We're different and we do it in different
Mhm.
ways. I mean, I said once like at a conference, I was like, I really think, the partner, the non-birthing parent, can do everything the birthing parent can do except for lactate, but they can
Right,
give a bottle.
absolutely.
So I don't
They
think,
they can change a diaper.
yeah, there's like,
Yeah.
I mean, coming up with a plan that works for your household and what have you is important, because some people do divide things quite differently based on what they want to do and how they want to do it. But I think some fundamentals are important, like getting food, getting sleep, getting time away from baby. I
Yes.
did that really early on. I would just like go for a walk and leave them together and come home. And then
Nice.
he was like, I thought we were supposed to be attracted to the baby's cry biologically. We should want our baby to survive. And when it cries, we should want to care for it. This is not happening. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't feel
Yeah.
attracted to this
Yeah.
cry. Yes. Yes.
So, yeah, from our like kind of biological perspective, we learned a few
Yes.
things too, and that was modified. So,
Yeah,
yeah, it was pretty funny.
absolutely. And so what do you think, is kind of missing from your space in terms of neuroscience research? I know that you yourself have done a lot of research, of course, and there's research out there, and I think there's a lot of research lacking, especially in terms of maternal mental health and
Yeah.
female health in general.
Yeah.
But what do you want to see in the space,
Yeah.
coming in terms of research?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of research, well, and I would start first, and maybe in terms of education, I feel like it's important to know a lot of different things. And I think that this is where this podcast is filling some gaps and hearing more stories about people's experiences. And also, like, unfortunately, we're not educating females about their bodies, how it works, what to do, what's normal. Like we don't have kind of this, like baby doesn't have to lactate for 24 hours. I mean, maybe that's taught in a course now. But there's a lot of little tidbits of information that could be helpful in this transition, just to know what your body can and can't do. And maybe it's just not compiled and it's not focused. So, but I think there's a huge part of education that's lacking around this, the biology of pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. So that's number one. But when we talk about the brain, for me, I feel like there's so many gaps in the literature. I mean, we know quite a bit from our animal research, which can be more invasive in looking at the brain and different, mechanisms and what have you. And there's a lot of conserved brain mechanisms that we also see in all mammals, for example. So we have kind of an understanding, but we actually don't have a very good understanding of the brain during pregnancy, for example, not even in animal models, right? We don't really study that so much because often the brain has been studied in relation to maternal caregiving behaviors. And more now with partners or fathers, but traditionally it's been maternal care, because a lot of mammalian species primary care is by the mother, the female, and the birthing parent, essentially. So we know a lot about this in the brain, how the brain changes with this, but it's usually been around this behavior and not necessarily birth, like what happens in birth. I mean, to your brain, to your physiology, I don't know. I mean, there's some research on this, of course, but the brain part, I don't know. And then pregnancy, like what's going on in pregnancy? How do brain changes in pregnancy? How are they linked to hormone levels? How are they linked to fetal brain development? How are they linked to mental health? I mean, there's a lot of questions there. So in fact, I think we just don't even know all the normative changes in the brain that happen in a healthy pregnancy, birth, and postpartum, and even longer postpartum. I think there's lots of questions to be answered still, just about the basic biology and basic neurophysiology and the changes in the brain during those times. And then how they link to mental health, for example. So it's growing, the field's growing, but I think that for me on a professional level, that's something that's really lacking. And I think it's because maybe we focus a lot on the offspring development and not so much on the parents. And also, I mean, we're just supposed to be happy when we're pregnant anyway, aren't we? And have a baby. I mean, just to be sarcastic, but that's our role as females in the world, is to produce, and it's just a thing we go through. I don't know. I don't know what the perspective is, but I do know, I mean, I always love some of my friends and colleagues in this research space, because some of them don't have kids, some of them are men, some of them, who knows, whatever, all different people. They don't have to be a parent to love pregnancy. And really, some of them are so enthusiastic about how cool it is. This pregnancy from a biological perspective, like it's actually pretty amazing what the body's doing. It's incredible. Like your heart changes in size, and like your brain's changing, and but like there's the placenta, like it's actually quite phenomenal what goes on in a female body. And I think that enthusiasm, fortunately, I get surrounded by it periodically, but that if it could be carried forward into educational spaces around perinatal health, that would be lovely, just to be like, this is cool, people, this is what happens.
It's amazing. Absolutely. And I think you're right. Like, it is interesting that there's so much more focus on the physiological side and like the physical side, I think, right? Versus like you said, what are those changes in the brain that are happening during pregnancy? Right. Hormone level. And even like, if we think of, again, how are we preparing mentally, like for the fact that while we're carrying this baby, we are caring for it. Like, I would think that because of course people experience anxiety during pregnancy.
Definitely.
Right. Of course. And all those thoughts can come in even without heightened anxiety, but just those kind of anxious or intrusive thoughts, like, is my baby going to die in delivery, or like, is something going to happen like inside and I don't have control and I can't see the baby? And so I think it would be interesting and important to have more research on how is the brain changing and affected and, during pregnancy. A question about the biology of things, because again, I am so excited and like so interested in the neuroscience and the biology piece. But I know just from my experience of challenges with breastfeeding and feeling like, okay, I am female. So I know that biologically I'm wired and I'm meant to feed my child with breast milk, for example, but it's not working. So that was hard for me to rectify because I'm like, so then why can't I do it? Like, or why don't I have enough for my son when I know my body, everyone's telling me my body is going to produce enough for this baby.
Yeah, so this is where I've thought a lot about this idea recently, because if you look back, in fact, not every female who birthed did lactate. That's why they were wet nurses. That's why there were babies that died. That's right. So, okay, in the textbook, these parts are there and they're supposed to do these things, but I think that I mean, it doesn't always happen that way for everybody biologically. And maybe for various reasons, for genetics, for whatever reasons. But back in the day, not every birthing person breastfed their baby, for sure not. It was
Right.
actually out of fashion in certain places, in certain times. And
Mhm.
also, if you couldn't, you would find somebody else to do it because there was often other people around. Or worst case scenario, baby doesn't survive, right?
Survive. Right. And so that's, and then I try to remember that. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
no, those things exist for a reason because there are other people in the world that have not been able to breastfeed. So, you know, t- trying to
Yeah.
remind myself to keep that at the forefront. But I think that is important to remember because
Yeah.
again, sometimes like I understand on that biological level, it being in a female body, technically I should be able to produce milk, but like when I'm pumping and there's like literally 2 drops in the bottle after half an hour, something's not working. It's like no
Yeah.
matter what medication I take and how much I hope and how much I pump, there's no milk.
And I think that's important to remember, that there is like a whole range of our bodies are different. There's a whole range of
Yeah.
abilities, right? So, okay, my husband likes to talk about evolutionary perspective. I'm not a big evolutionary person, but whatever. But he's like, from that perspective,
Right.
of course, we're mammals, so we should be feeding we should survive vaginal birth, feed the baby. Like, this makes sense, right? If we're to keep our species surviving and our genes going to the next generation, what have you. But I also think, I mean, we've also adapted, let's say, not modified, but we adapt also to situations. So of course, if someone can breastfeed your baby and you can't, then that makes sense. The baby still will survive. I mean, the birthing part, people died in childbirth back in the day because they didn't
Absolutely.
know how to do C-sections, but then
Yeah.
C-sections have been around for quite some time. I don't know the history of them.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so I think that there's always been a range or a diversity in what the female body can do. And if we look at
Yes.
the average, that's what we're going on often when we talk about, especially in the space of becoming a mother. But I also think on top of that, we actually don't talk necessarily about the whole average. We talk about a very beautified, idealistic idea around motherhood, glorified idea around motherhood, which is lovely. But I
Yep.
think we also have to acknowledge that, parenthood is diverse. People do it different ways with different resources. All different ways can be acceptable, and you can still be a good parent in many different ways, shapes, and forms, right? So yeah, but it's hard, especially in the space of motherhood and mothering, that's always is often just one thing, one look, one glorified ideal that's impossible to attain. I mean, for most people, for probably everybody.
Yeah, and I guess, like, you're right, like, just even reframing it as, like, we all have different abilities, because I would say that about every other aspect of my life or my brain having ADHD. Okay, I have different abilities than other people and different strengths,
Yeah.
but for some reason, it was difficult to apply that to the notion of breastfeeding.
Yeah.
and feeding my kid because biologically that's what I'm supposed to do because he's this helpless little being. But then I was like, but there's formula, so he survived, thank goodness,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think it's important just to like know that we can talk about that in this space, that there can be different abilities and any biological function. I'm just working this out in
Yeah.
my head, but any biological function can not function very well.
Yeah.
Like
Things
people's hearts
happen.
can, yeah, like people's hearts can not work properly, or our lungs, or we can get different diseases, or
Yeah.
so why not the same with that function, that physical function of breastfeeding?
Yeah. Yeah. But I think because we perceive it as the only natural way to feed your child, then it's hard because your body could fail you then essentially. So it's a hard one, the breastfeeding guilt. It's a big one because I think there's history around it. There's a lot of pressure, sociocultural stuff. And I think we have to remind each other that, yeah, it's super great to be able to do that. Also, society is failing a lot of moms because they push the breastfeeding and then there's no resources. I mean, I was in the biggest maternity hospital, one of the biggest in Belgium, and my lactation consultant person was like, didn't help at all with latching. We were doing all this stuff, and it took my midwife, like, who just could put the two of us together. But you don't always have people who can do that.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I'm sure
Absolutely.
it didn't work for all her people either, right? I mean, it's not always 100% guarantee, but we don't have often the support and the resources to actually really support this idea. So I think that society fails people as well, in that, for sure, in that regard.
Even the amount of clients that I've heard who, they happen to have a baby on the weekend, how dare they, not have their baby during the week, and, no lactation consultant on a Sunday because, babies don't need to eat on a Sunday.
No,
right?
of course no.
Yeah. So it's like, again, like you said, right, just the lack of resources, the lack of support, and so I think, again, we can empower ourselves and try to help ourselves as best as we can by doing a bit of research beforehand and saying, okay, who do I need around me? What do I need on that post-birth plan to support me, baby, partner, feeding, sleep, all those things. Who am I going to go to if that's not going great? And, or what resource can I choose and say, okay, this is a resource I trust. I'm not going to read everything on Google because that in itself could be damaging. And, just kind of reach out to those specific people that I've already kind of put on my plan for support.
I definitely think that's a great idea. And I wish I had, at least in the lactation front, had sorted that out a bit better. And I'm very, very thankful to this woman I met at the conference. I can see her, but I don't know her name, who told me one thing that I carried forward and then fed my son on one side. And that was a lifesaver, I think, in lots of ways. It just decreased so much stress and struggle for both of us.
Absolutely.
So
and I think that's why telling stories, sharing our stories, because that's why it's so important, because we don't know, like someone could just, latch on, for lack of a better word, to like one piece of our story that could be just so super helpful for them. Right. So absolutely so important. And then, that piece of like trying to trust ourselves, trusting baby, like baby's learning too.
Of course.
Right. Like they just, they're getting to know us on the outside and we're getting to know them, and we're learning how to feed and they're learning how to feed and latch and all those things. And so trusting both of us too, to like, okay, we're going to get there, and, we can get help if we need it, but we can get there.
Yeah. And a lot of mistakes on the way, just so you know.
Oh my gosh.
A lot.
So many, right? Yes.
But
so
then
many.
It's also, hopefully, like, it was very helpful to have that third person in the room, like my partner, just to like feed off of, essentially, to like, we could laugh about things, or he could spot things, or he could be like, I will give a bottle, like, this is fine. Like, you can, he can be that rational voice sometimes.
So any final thoughts or anything that you want to share about your experience, or, anything that came from
It was a
that?
journey that I was not anticipating. I don't know, that the experience itself was quite different than what I would have thought, but I was open to experiencing whatever happened, which was helpful, and trusting myself and my people that it would go okay.
Well, thank you so much, Jodi, for sharing your story. I really appreciate it. And I think so many people are going to take so much from just hearing your story and those different experiences in different countries and, different challenges with nursing. And I really appreciate you sharing.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It was so lovely to talk to Jodi, hear her story about her experiences with finding care providers in different countries than her home country, delivering there, and having some difficult experiences with nursing and having a baby in the NICU. It was also great to talk about advocating for our perinatal care, as well as some of the biology of nursing and neuroscience of anxiety in the perinatal period. Please leave a comment and let me know if you shared any similar experiences to Jodi, or if you learned something new from this episode. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Please share this podcast with any of your friends or family members who may benefit from it. If you feel you are experiencing any of the symptoms or issues that we discussed today, please reach out to any one of your supports. You can also go to perinatalwellbeing.ca for more information, blog posts, and podcast episodes. Check out our new episode every Wednesday.